All right. All right, and I'm seeing that we are live. Welcome everyone to Community Board 10, our November Environmental Committee meeting. I'm your acting chair, Dan Heddix, just taking over briefly for today. We have two presentations today, one from Department of Sanitation on snow removal and one from National Grid. I'd like to make this try to speed this along today as we have some members who have to leave at 8. So I'll turn it over to Department of Sanitation for Marissa.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Hi, good evening, everyone. I apologize for being on the phone. My name is Marissa Yanni. I'm a community affairs liaison with the Department of Sanitation. I have some updates, just some notes about snow planning, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has, and I promise I'll be as brief as possible. So for the Department of Sanitation, we will be in night plow operations later this month. We're going to be increasing manpower on the night shifts for coverage for snow and for any winter weather response. We have over 6,500 sanitation workers who are ready to go at a moment's notice. That is the goal, at least. We will be using salt, again, as always, as we always have, salt and brine for the roadways to make them, easy to maneuver. And we have 31 permanent salt sites and 11 seasonal, so 42 altogether. Salt spreading will be the same as it's been in the past. If there's even a chance of snow or frozen precipitation or just a trace of it literally on the ground, we're going to start putting out the salt and the brine. And each salt spreader can hold about 16 tons of rock salt. Moving on, why is this not? Sorry, just looking at my notes. And then for brine application, that's used as an anti-icing measure with rock salt to prevent dangerous road conditions. When the weather conditions permit, the department will pre-treat the roadways up to 24 hours in advance of any snowstorm, hoping we don't get any big snow. For snow operations, looking at plowing. So plowing is going to start when snowfall accumulates, accumulation exceeds 2 inches. And we're going to use holsters and pickup trucks to get through any hilly or kind of dead-end streets, and using our power blades that we attach to all collection trucks. There will be no collection operations during snow operations, and all snow will be pushed to the right-hand side. We will, of course, be removing snow from pedestrian infrastructure. DSMY and DOT recruit snow laborers to assist with this, and that's where we're removing snow from bus stops, crosswalks, and other pedestrian infrastructure when after heavy snow falls. People can actually sign up if you know anyone who wants to be a snow laborer. That's actually open right now, the registration. People can go to nyc.gov/snow. And you'll be able to sign up. Just be aware, you got to be at least 18 years old and fully vaccinated. That was a requirement last year as well. We're also going to be taking care of protected bike lanes. As last year, we have an increase in equipment that we have. We have about 50 pieces of equipment that we can use to clear snow from protected bike lanes. And this is in addition to any skid steers we have, pickup trucks, and a couple of other small pieces. Snow clearing operations will, just like last year, we're going to be doing the snow melting and setting up those stations. I don't have the locations right now of where the snow melting stations will be in Brooklyn. I do have the ones from last year. And I don't know if they're going to remain the same. But we have a couple of places that were on Flatlands Avenue, Buffalo Avenue, Clinton Street, Bay Parkway from 60th to McDonald, Surf Avenue, Avenue D, and DuPont. I think only Bay Parkway, possibly, maybe not, is in your district, but not really, not super close to you all. Of course, we're doing our snow routes. We're going to have our critical and sector routes. Criticals are highways and major thoroughfares. That includes schools, hospitals, for emergency services, and then sectors, all other streets that we have. We're going to have our turn-by-turn navigation on all of our collection trucks that are going to be doing the plowing, because we're definitely going to have folks from other districts coming into, let's say, your district. That way they won't get lost and they'll stay on the right path. Of course, you can follow us on Plow NYC to see exactly where we are, and within the last hour kind of time frame that the street was plowed. Just to always remind folks about shoveling for property owners. If the snow stops falling between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m., you have 4 hours to shovel. Between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m., you have 14 hours. At 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., you have to have it cleared by 11 a.m. And lastly, if you do have any complaints or you need to tell us about any issues, you can always call my office. I can give that number when everyone's ready. And you can also call 311. It doesn't mean we'll be able to react immediately, but we will have a database then of where other complaints have been, and we'll be able to know where we're going to go next. But normally we're going to stick to the plan that's in place and those routes. And then if there's anything super critical, of course, let us know if there's an emergency, and we'll be able to see if we can get to that as soon as possible. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sorry if I spoke too quick. I know you said you had a short timeline.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. If any committee members have any questions? Larry, just make sure you unmute. Can't hear you still, Larry. There you go.
Yes, I was mentioned the first is 4th Avenue considered, is it an arterial road? Is that going to be plowed at the beginning, or I didn't hear 4th Avenue mentioned, is it?
So maybe
Oh,
Marissa,
no,
you
it's
can
like-
explain sectoring.
Yeah.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
No, I know that
If
we
you-
switched, DSNY switched to sectoring. Is that still going to be the plan?
Yes. Hold on one second. I just need to go back to my notes real quick, and then I will tell you. Yeah, we're going to have routes, streets that are going to be considered critical or sector. So critical is just the major highways and thoroughfares. So 4th Avenue, I need to double check if that is considered a critical.
That is
road.
considered a critical,
That's
according
definitely
to
a
It's a snow emergency street, isn't it?
according to Plow NYC. That is a critical route.
Yes.
Okay,
And that
great.
that's snow emergency. You used to have snow emergency streets. The red signs would say they weren't supposed to park there in a snow emergency. And what was
Okay,
the phone
and
number?
that
What was your phone number again? What was your phone number?
Oh, 646 885 4503. And that's the office number. So in case I'm not there, we're open 8 to 5. I mean, during snow, we have 24/7, but otherwise 8 to 5 if you need anything.
All right. And also for clarity for anyone listening at home, looks like all of our north-south avenues in Bay Ridge are considered critical routes.
Oh,
And
Anyone-
Crosstown too, and Crosstown streets too.
There are
Parkway or-
select east-west routes in the neighborhood that are critical, including Bay Ridge Parkway, Bay Ridge Avenue, all of the wider thoroughfares. And then there are a couple of select ones as well. 82nd Street between 3rd and 6th in Bay Ridge, and a few others in Diker. But the majority are sector designated. I love having the website up right there. It makes it so much easier. I
appreciate it.
actually do have a question, Marissa, specifically. Oh, what was it? You know what? It totally went out of my head. So
We have another question from Richard Day.
go ahead, Richard.
Hey, Marissa, it's Richard from the composting team. How's it going?
Oh, hey, Richard, what's going on?
Not much. I'm actually here as a member today of
Oh,
CB10. I just have 2 questions for you. One is that it looks like on open data we have the total salt tonnage per snow event by borough. Is there any way to get that by district? And then
I'm gonna
sort of
have to,
relatedly.
No operation.
Okay. Sure. And relatedly, it doesn't look like there's any information about brine usage there. Like no numbers whatsoever. It's just the salt totals. Is there any way to get that brine information like published as well, or are there plans for that at all?
That I'm not sure about having it published. That I don't know through the open data law if we have to include that. But I will ask anyway, Snow Ops, if I can see how much brine we've used in CV10 or at least in Brooklyn, in total Brooklyn South. At least you'll have a somewhat clearer number that way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I did remember my question, which was for snow laborer sign up. In the past, that has been the area that you register in is usually the area that you are prioritized for. Is that still correct?
Yeah, that is
All
still
right.
correct. It just,
So
of course, depends on how many people sign up.
Exactly. So for anyone in Bay Ridge who is who wants those bus stops and things cleared, please sign up. It is by your neighborhood. It's correct that only the laborers only move to other districts after their own has been cleared. Is that still how it works?
I believe so. Yeah.
All right. So we'll try to get a little bit of that information out to ensure that we have a healthy sign up this year for cleaning out our public transit stops.
What was that site again for the assistance in cleaning up the laborers?
nyc.gov//snow.
Thank you.
And,
Yes,
and
of
we'll
course.
be blasting that as well, Lisa, on our e-newsletter, this next
Thank you.
edition.
Got it.
Larry.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I always know it used to be I don't know, a tradition when you're clearing your car off or cleaning a sidewalk off, you could put the snow into the oncoming traffic and the traffic will crush it all. Is that no longer allowed?
No, yeah, please don't do that. Then you just, because if we've already gone down that block, we may not be going back down for a while. Correct, depending on how much is out there, of course, when cars go down, they're going to smush it. But if everyone is doing that on the block, you may have more snow than you need, and some cars just may not be able to go over. I'm thinking of very small Fiats that may not be able to handle that. But we really encourage folks to put it to the other side on the sidewalk, close to the curb or up against the property line, as far away as possible, just so if we don't go back down that street or if some cars aren't driving down, we just want to keep it safe.
All right. Any other questions from committee members? All right. Marissa, thank you so much for that presentation. And
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize for not being on.
No problem at all. And we look forward to having a smooth snow year coming forward. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brian Gamaldi from National Grid.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Coincidentally, I'm not just here representing National Grid. I happen to be a CB10 resident. I'm on Colonial between 80th and 81st. So I probably would have been attending this meeting anyway.
Somewhere over here.
Yeah. So if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to share my screen. I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about the state's Climate Action Council. And can you see that?
Yep, that has started up.
Great. And some of the things that are going on in terms of public process, what we're doing about it, and some things that we'd like members of the board to know, and the members of the community in general. So National Grid, as you know us, downstate, we're solely a gas company. Throughout the rest of the state, we are gas and electric, and in Western and parts of Central New York, we're solely an electric company. So we have been thinking about the right solutions to comply with the state's climate law since it was enacted in 2019. And for those of you who don't know, the climate law, or the CLCPA as it's commonly known, requires reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2035 and 85% by 2050. But the CLCPA, the actual law itself, only dictates what we must achieve, meaning the goals of the emissions reduction targets, but doesn't prescribe in the law how we get there. So the law set up this Climate Action Council which is a group of appointees, partially by the legislature, partially by the governor, 23 in number, who were tasked with creating a scoping plan to suggest how the state might get to meet the CLCPA targets. And about a year ago, in December of 21, they released a draft scoping plan and they put it out for public feedback. And National Grid and the utilities and environmental activists and others have been debating the contents of that plan now for the last 10 or 12 months. And public engagement happened earlier in the year. Public comment section ended in July. The CAC has been evaluating those responses, and they'll issue a final plan in December that'll be voted on, and then it'll go to DEC to promulgate regulations. So very high level scoping plan. By 2025, it requires 6,000 megawatts of solar and roughly 185 trillion BTU reduction through increased efficiencies. Scoping plan, generally speaking, when you talk about it, is essentially leaning very heavily on what we call an all electrification scenario, meaning electrifying most of the uses throughout the state, including industrial and home heating that are currently on gas systems. By 2030, it requires 70% renewable energy and an additional 3,000 megawatts of battery storage. By 2040, another 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind and zero emission electricity. There are some elements of the current scoping plan that National Grid and some of the other utilities disagree with, such as bans on new gas hookups beginning now in 2025, and bans on gas and new construction by 2025, and also the phasing out of gas appliances for existing customers beginning in 2030. So if your stove fails or your furnace fails after 2030, you'd be required to retrofit your home to an electric solution. And there's also provisions in there that talk about no gasoline automobiles past 2035. And so there are some things that could be said that are good about the scoping plan. You know, we all want to lower emissions and have a consumer-focused energy transition. Energy efficiency is step one, and we'll get into that in a second. Electrification is good. You know, we're an electric company in the state. We know we're going to electrify a lot. We're going to have hybrid heating options, but we feel very strongly about retaining choice for appliances and dealing with the cost and practicality limitations of a full electrification scenario. We are also talking about low carbon fuels, renewable natural gas and hydrogen, and I'll explain more on that in a second. And the use of the existing natural gas delivery system and our electric system to deliver reliable and resilient service. These are systems that were built and improved over the course of decades. They've got, you know, unionized labor working to maintain them. It's a cost-effective way to deliver energy and can be adapted to meet the climate goals that are required by the law. We talked about some things we don't like. We don't like gas bans. We don't like to seek to decommission the existing gas networks. We're concerned about overall reliability. The New York Independent System Operator, which is the sort of gatekeeper of energy on the electric side, is very concerned about some of the reliability margins in the plan and has made those statements public. There's no assessment of consumer cost. We've done our own analysis, and we know definitively that an all electrification scenario will cost more for customers, both in terms of the cost to build the system, but also the cost to operate it in individual homes. And there are very aggressive goals in terms of the building of offshore wind and solar farms to find renewable sources of electricity in just the next 8 years. We're currently at about 26% of the goal, and they need to be at this point at about 70% of the goal to meet those targets. The plan is also a little light on the energy security issues that have been so recently prevalent in the news. To go back to the renewable point, though, National Grid as a company worldwide is one of the largest investors in offshore wind. In our UK business, we have run the electric franchises for all of the UK. We already have 10 gigawatts of offshore wind, so we know how to build it and operate it. We're just a little concerned about having to build it and operate it in the next 8 years. And for any of you who've built capital construction projects around New York, that 8 years is a relatively short time frame, and it'll be here tomorrow. So just to give you a little bit of a view of the heating consumption by energy, natural gas makes up roughly 70% of all the heat in the state of New York, followed very closely by petroleum-based and then biomass and then other. And then the Northeast is one of the most challenging regions to decarbonize heat. So if you look at this graph here on the left, the Northeast is double the size of the next largest region in the United States, which is the Mid-Atlantic. And that means that it's very difficult to change the character and makeup of how we provide heat to customers. For electric infrastructure requirements, if you look at the bar on the right, on the left here, roughly we're producing about 70 gigawatts of electricity for the state of New York. To get to full electrification load, you got to quadruple that. You have to get to the bar on the far right, which is about 280 gigawatts. If you do it in a hybrid way, which is partially electrify and maintain some of the gas system, you meet in the middle and you avoid having to build roughly 80 gigawatts of load, or in New York, 50 gigawatts under the New York ISO. On the cost of electrification, to go full electrification in New York, it'll cost customers up and down the state roughly $70 billion more than maintaining a hybrid approach, gas and electric. When we looked at this, we thought about how to get there. And getting there is relatively difficult for two reasons. One, adoption shortfall, convincing consumers to switch over the systems in their homes from gas to electric. We think there will be a 40 to 50% shortfall in adoption rates. And when you talk about ease of electrification, we did a study with the mayor's office in Con Ed and believe that because of the older building stocks in the very densely populated areas like New York City, roughly 70% of buildings in New York City are difficult to electrify, which means that there has to be a way to find a better way. So hybrid approach in terms of being more affordable. I won't drain the whole slide, but today in $2040 is the bar on the far right. Average heating home in 2040 will cost roughly $4,100 a year. To do it in an all electrification scenario to operate that same home would be about $5,100 a year, and a hybrid approach, $800 less at about $4,300 a year. And we'll give you copies of these slides. I know I'm talking relatively fast. So in April, we at National Grid announced our fossil-free vision plan to fully eliminate fossil natural gas from our systems. And we set out a pathway to do that utilizes RNG and green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is hydrogen produced from renewable sources, mainly wind and solar. We have those assets in place today, and we're building others. So we got a demonstration project in Long Beach, Long Island, that will be injecting hydrogen into our gas system out there in Point Lookout. And we plan to scale that through the rest of the network in the coming decade. We believe our analysis favors cost and the practicality for our customers versus full electrification. And it meets the CLCPA requirements. The important thing to remember about the CLCPA is it doesn't require absolute zero. It only requires an 85% reduction from the base year. And we're working with our skilled workforce to do this. We leverage the existing networks, and we're working with our partners in the state and the federal government to find clean fuel standards, support hydrogen programs, update federal appliance standards. Instead of banning appliances that burn natural gas, one of the ways that you could go is, for example, working with the Department of Buildings and the code committees to get hydrogen-ready appliances so that manufacturers manufacture to a hydrogen standard. So 10, 20 years from now, when someone's burner burns out or their gas dryer goes, or their stove goes, it could be replaced with an appliance where the industry came up with the engineering solution in place instead of having to retrofit that home to fit with electric appliances. And the way we're going to get there is four ways. Energy efficiency in buildings, increasing weatherization and energy efficiency in buildings roughly meets about 1/3 of the target. We talked about the 100% fossil gas network, scaling RNG and hydrogen over time to replace natural gas in the system, and then building the system to be able to handle that load. Hybrid gas and electric. This is more for places like in Buffalo, New York, where we're primarily an electric system. Electric heat pumps don't work generally when the temperatures are sustained in very cold environments for prolonged periods of time. So when you have those coldest months of the year in December, January, and February in places like Buffalo, you would use a gas heating system to bring the base temperature of the building up and then use the heat pumps to maintain it. And then targeted electrification and network geothermal. We've got some geothermal pilots in front of the PSC, 2 in New York City, 1 on Long Island, and 1 up in Troy, New York. to prove out that geothermal systems can work at large scale. So if you think large apartment complexes on a geothermal heat pump as opposed to being on the gas system. And the approach we believe to be lower cost, roughly 15 to 20% cheaper for customers. It doesn't leave customers behind, leverages the existing network, more resilient and reliable. 9 major storms in the last year. Sporadic areas around the state have had electric outages because most of that is above ground. Gas systems haven't had a single outage. Less gas on a winter peak day, utilizing our existing workforce, and more likely to reach net zero by 2050 because some of the aggressive plans on the electric side put out by the state will be tough to build when the state says they're going to build them. Having the backup of the gas system in place allows us to keep those progress initiatives moving to be able to achieve those goals on time and on target and on budget. We talked a little bit about low carbon fuels. I won't drain the slide. Renewable natural gas, you'll see an announcement for us in the next couple of weeks. We've been working on a project in Newtown Creek, which is an RNG digester. We take food waste from the city, we produce renewable natural gas, and we're injecting it into the system. And there are RNG developers that are setting up around the state to produce clean renewable natural gas that will be bought by National Grid and injected into our system at various places. On the hydrogen side, we are building offshore wind that will come on shore between Queens and Long Island. It will repower some of our power plants out there, and it will use the excess hydrogen to be able to be pumped into the gas system to further displace natural gas over time. So we submitted our comments to the Climate Action Council talking about the need to maintain affordability, ensuring our pathway to net zero in a way that preserves reliability and resilience, establishing an energy transition that's fair for our customers and equitable for all New Yorkers, and creating an energy transition that's fair to our workers. If you listen to the environmental movement, they talk about reskilling our unionized workforce, and that for us is just a non-starter. So our core messages to the state and to the Climate Action Council have been about affordability and choice, supply, and keeping economic growth moving. You may have noticed the state announced Micron chip factory up outside of Syracuse, New York. That's our service territory. Micron will be our largest gas customer in the state, and we will be working with them to find solutions that we can deliver in terms of decarbonized gas and renewable natural gas and hydrogen, while also meeting their electric needs. There are some additional resources that are available. All the utilities in New York got together. We have a website that we jointly run, has all of our collective comments on the Climate Action Council, talks about different areas. We analyze, for example, what wind is available inside the state of New York, how much dispatchable generation is there. And dispatchable means you flip the switch and the power is there. For days when it's cloudy or wind isn't blowing, those resources are not necessarily available. So you need a viable backup, and we're working on solutions there. We have some battery projects in flight. We've got some in Calverton and East Montauk and East Hampton, but battery storage isn't there for longer durations or durations longer than 8 hours. As that technology scales, those will be added to the mix. So the message essentially for today is that on the energy transition, we need an all of the above approach. Relying solely on electricity is not the best from a cost perspective. It's not necessarily the best from a practicality perspective or a resiliency perspective. We're working with the state, we're working with NYSERDA to prove out some of these other technologies that we're running in other places like RNG and hydrogen. And we do believe that that's a way to meet the mix. So when built out at scale, we're looking to electrify roughly 75% of our networks upstate and downstate. For the harder to electrify places, there will be a decarbonized gas system. And when there are other technologies that come available, like network geothermal or heat pumps that work in cold climates, we'll be rolling those out as well. But the bigger thing as a community board to understand is the state hasn't adopted any plan yet. And with any public process, there are those that are for it and others that are against it. All we're advocating for is a moderate approach. Look at the solutions, understand what it's going to cost, understand whether it's deliverable when you need it delivered, and think about the implications to customers. And that's basically the speech in a nutshell. I'm happy to send you, I Joanne, Josephine, I already sent you a copy of the presentation of the PDF. You're
Okay,
welcome to
great.
share it
Absolutely.
with anybody. I'm also happy to answer any questions. I know in a relatively short amount of time, I threw a lot of information at you. It's relatively complicated. When you have some of these advocates that go to these council meetings, they talk in relatively short sound bites, or they, talk about National Grid and energy solutions, 140 characters at a time on social media. We're charged with by the PSC to deliver safe and reliable and affordable energy. We have to get it right. And that's why we're going to the community boards and we're talking to members of the community. We're going to chambers of commerce. And the thing that scares me about this is, when I go to some of the larger meetings at chambers and I start with, how many people in the room have heard of the Climate Action Council, and, 2 people raise their hand, and usually those 2 people work for us. State's not doing a really good job of telling people what they're debating, and the decisions that they make before the end of this year are really going to impact people's lives in a really profound way. So the message that we've given the governor and the legislature has been, look, this isn't about pausing, right? We all know we have to do this, but let's do it in a practical, pragmatic way so that we don't leave anybody behind. The city of New York is in a process now where they're looking for compliance with Local 197, and we're working with them on that. There are some envelope issues in terms of weatherization, but for some of these co-ops and condos around the city, it's an unfunded mandate. How are these buildings going to comply with that when you're talking about fining them, extraordinary amounts if they don't make retrofits? Our position there is, we understand you want to effectuate change. We can be the catalyst for change. But if we serve those buildings decarbonized gas, they don't have to do those expensive retrofits. So let's talk about how to scale that up. And that we're getting some traction in that conversation, because I think the reality or the practicality of some of the costs and some of these solutions are really coming to bear, and the state's starting to realize they may be going down the wrong path. So with that, I'll shut up and I'll take your questions.
All right. We already got one. Larry, go ahead. And then Daniel.
You mentioned Long Island. You have a plant in Long Beach. I thought that Nassau and Suffolk was public service, electric and gas.
So PSE&G just has the electric franchise on Long Island. National Grid has the gas franchise through Nassau and Suffolk County.
Okay, okay, so that's why they even keep that G on their name, but they're a subsidiary of the New Jersey-based company.
Right.
And also National Grid is based in London.
That's right.
All right. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was a lot of information, and I appreciate it. I'm just curious, and again, since it was a lot, like if I'm getting anything wrong, like feel free to correct me. I think you mentioned using some wind power to help generate the hydrogen gas that you're using. Obviously the New York Bight is like one of the most promising locations for offshore wind. And that's starting to be developed now, or at least, they're in the initial stages of leasing it out, is my understanding. Have you all looked into that, and is that just being used for electricity, or
so
are there any options there?
We're actually building it. National Grid, in a joint venture with RWE, took the largest lease in the Bight auction just offshore here. We will be producing 3 gigawatts of electric capacity that'll come on shore to heat homes, generate electricity on Long Island and in the city.
Cool. So just to follow up, so that's for electrification and the homes that convert over to that in terms.
No, it could also be for gas. So
it could be okay.
So when you have offshore wind, the turbines turn during the day when the electric load is up at the highest. And at night, the turbine still turns. So instead of wasting that energy, you take that electrical energy and you run it through an electrolyzer, right, which is basically water. And you create hydrogen, and then you store that hydrogen in gaseous form, or you create a fuel cell with it. We're already doing this out in Lido Beach. The town of Hempstead we set up what was originally a hydrogen fueling station for county vehicles, and we've been fueling their county vehicles there for the last 5 or 6 years. We're expanding that plant. We have onshore wind there with a turbine onshore right by Jones Beach. We have solar panels there, which create additional electricity. We have electrolyzers on site. So when the electricity comes off the solar panels or off the turbine, gets run through electrolyzers, creates hydrogen. That hydrogen is going to be pumped into the gas system in Point Lookout. After Superstorm Sandy, all of the homes on Point Lookout had to have their pipes changed. And what we did was we changed them with, we call it leak-prone pipe. It's yellow plastic that you see us digging in the streets around here. 100% leak proof, which allows us to basically run 100% hydrogen through it if we had to.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Josephine.
Yeah, Brian, I want to say thank you very much for the presentation. I feel like I learned a lot that I truly was not aware of. I think if I take my DM hat off for a moment and say, living in Dyker Heights, where our electric grid is above ground and not the most reliable at times, especially during terrible storms, I do appreciate having the diversification of having energy in an alternate form with my still have the use of my stove, and thinking about energy and how it's going to be changing in the future, I think is important conversation for us to learn about, know about as board members and as a community in general. So I just wanted to say thank you for reaching out and coming out, and we will be sharing certainly and having the conversation with our board on the updates. And I really wasn't aware. A lot comes across my desk, but I do appreciate you coming out and putting it in a few slides that made it easily understandable that we can review. So
I
thank
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure everybody on this call has a copy of that presentation.
Will do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I do have two questions from my side. One of which is, I know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, New York City has to generate a certain amount of its own electricity within city limits, correct? Is that is that still in effect? I remember reading that a while back. I'm not sure if it's still in effect.
There is. We, though, in the city are only the gas network. So that only impacts Con Ed down here.
Wonderful. I was wondering if there has been any talk about how the offshore wind would affect that, but probably not the correct forum. But the other one would be, I did notice in your presentation, again, amazing presentation, you had a brief part of the shortfall for transitioning away from gas, that you're expecting about a 40% or so rate where you wouldn't be able to convince people to get away from gas. I was wondering if either you have the data on hand or could send it over, the percentage of people in Community Board 10 that are on gas versus already electrified, so we could kind of know how serious that might actually be.
Roughly 98%.
There we go.
Are on the gas system here. There are very few buildings or customers that we have that are solely electric.
Excellent. So that shortfall is going to be serious for, say, eventually transitioning. Again, your plan looked out all the way to 2050, correct? So
one of the things that's interesting about the city's gas ban, and we didn't necessarily oppose it. We tried to engage with the city to make it more useful because they had really aggressive implementation dates, and they had no appetite to have a conversation about phasing it in over time. They wanted it to be 2024, and that was it. So we pulled our support for the bill with Gennaro and others, and that's why we pulled it, because they wouldn't have a phased in approach. But the state forces us to artificially constrain how much gas we can buy to bring into New York, which you may have seen fights about things like vaporizers in Greenpoint, and those are resiliency resources. Those are built so that if the pipelines ever fail in bringing gas in from out of state, we have assets on site. Those two big tanks can keep all our gas customers fed with gas for up to 11 days on the coldest days of the year if a pipeline fails. And the state's giving us the hardest time about approving that vaporizer permit, and that'll end up likely in some fight later down the road. But the types of things that we're talking about in terms of electrification, newer construction can be built in a way that the building is sealed, can almost be impervious to loss of heat. So it's easier to heat those buildings on electrification technologies because they're built to newer codes. But if you think about how drafty older buildings are, or they're built with older technology, a lot of the buildings in Midtown Manhattan, for example, were built in the 30s and the 40s. They're not made to retain heat, and there are huge loss factors. In my particular case, I happen to have a house where I have forced hot water. So when my burner shuts off, the hot water is still in the radiators. I still get heat radiating for a period of time, and that carries us for a while until the temperature drops and the burner comes back on. Well, if you heat with a heat pump pumps hot air. When the pump shuts off, the hot air stops. Room loses heat much faster. It's a less efficient technology. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that the state doesn't understand is if they try to force everybody over to heat pumps, particularly those homes that already have hot water systems, then you're asking them to pay more money for a product that is inferior. And that's just not going to stand from a customer adoption perspective, which is why we think the adoption rates will be so low.
All right.
And actually, Dan and committee, the 311 open data, our number 2 district-wide service requests are related to heat and hot water. So, we do have older buildings. My home was built in 1903. So I think it is an important conversation for us here in District 10, where our housing stock is older. And I recall shortly before the pandemic, maybe it was in 19 or 18, having a briefing about the constraints of our electric grid. So I'm curious about, how we're going to be bolstering that in New York City with our aging infrastructure, and the grids were at capacity where we had law changes for our commercial establishments to reduce energy because the capacity constraints on our electric grid, and it's aging and old. A lot of our infrastructure is old, as we know. So
I'll leave you with one stat that'll point that out. So today, the gas system on the coldest winter day produces 3 times the amount of energy than the electric system produces on the hottest summer day. So you think of those hot summer days, you get that notice from Con Ed to turn up your thermostat so you take less energy, or they curtail power. Think about having to build an electric grid that's 4 times the size of that to take the gas system out. And if you've ever dug anything in a city street and you notice that you can't fit a player card between the existing franchises that are there, that's going to be incredibly hard to do it in an underground, resilient way. And if you build it above ground, you're vulnerable to storms.
Mm-hmm.
Which we know in Zico Heights. We've experienced that for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Do we have any other committee members? Any questions? Last call. All right. Brian, thank you so much for your presentation, and also DSNY earlier. Thanks so much for coming out and letting us know what's going on in our community.
Appreciate it.
With that, I think we're clear to close out, right, Josephine?
Yes, we are. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. Good
Thank
night,
you, everyone.
everyone. Have a good day.